The first time I realized my son was pulling away from me, it wasn't in some dramatic tear-stained moment. It was in the quiet, the kind that settles in a room like dust unnoticed until the light hits just right. We were sitting at the dinner table, just the two of us. I had made his favorite baked mac and cheese, extra crispy on the top, the way he liked. I slid the plate toward him, smiling, expecting the usual grin, the quick "thanks, Mom." Instead, he just stared down at it. Then he asked flatly, "Does Grandma make it like this too?" I blinked. It wasn't the question that stung, it was the tone, hollow, distant. Like I was an acquaintance who had done something off. I forced a smile and nodded. "Not exactly, but I hope this one's okay." He didn't answer, just ate in silence. And I sat there, my fork untouched, feeling the world tilt slightly off its axis. That was 6 weeks before the custody hearing. My name is Lena Brooks. I'm 34 years old. I work in education support services. Nothing glamorous, just enough to get by. I've got a soft voice, a careful mind, and a heart that's been kicked around more than I care to admit. I thought being quiet meant being safe. That if I didn't make waves, I wouldn't drown. I was wrong. My marriage to Elliot was never perfect, but I loved him once. We met when I was 26, fresh out of a job that had burned me out and looking for something softer. He was charming in that unbothered way some men are like. The world was just a place to move through, not get entangled in. We had Caleb the next year. For a while it felt like life had settled into something gentle, but Elliot wasn't built for gentleness. When things got hard, job stress, money tight, Caleb sick, he drifted, started staying out late, got cold, not angry, not abusive, just absent. And that's its own kind of violence, isn't it? The kind where no one throws punches, but somehow everything still breaks. By the time he filed for separation, I'd already done most of the grieving. What I didn't expect was the betrayal that came next. When Elliot moved out, he went back to his mother's house. Judith. Judith. If Steele had a voice, it would sound like hers. She had always been cordial, not warm, not cruel, just civil, distant. Like I was an intern at her company and she was too polite to say I wasn't qualified. She used phrases like, "Oh, you're doing your best, and I'm sure Lena means well." Never said a cruel word, but somehow left bruises behind. I didn't want Caleb near that coldness full time, but I didn't have a choice. My lease was up, my savings low. So when Judith offered to watch him during the weeks I worked late, I swallowed my pride and said yes. It was temporary, just until I found a new rhythm. A new place I should have known. Nothing with Judith was ever temporary. It started small, a missed phone call here, a forgotten bedtime chat there. Caleb telling me, "Grandma says you need more rest, so I can't stay up late to talk to you." Then it was Judith deciding Caleb should eat only organic, that he shouldn't go to the public playground anymore, too unsanitized. Then it was Grandma says, "I can't bring your lunch to school because you don't know the new nutrition rules." Then one day he called me by my first name, Lena. I already brushed my teeth. He caught himself and turned red, but the damage was done. My 9-year-old had started replacing Mom with something else, something coached, something conditioned. I felt the floor vanish beneath me, not because of the word, but because of what it meant. Someone was rewriting me in my son's story. One evening I arrived early to pick him up. I hadn't told anyone, I just wanted to surprise him. Judith answered the door in her silk robe with that unnerving half-smile. "Oh," she said, voice clipped. "Didn't realize you were coming this early. I got off work early, thought I'd join you for dinner." She blinked once. I already fed him, I still want to see him. She stepped aside, reluctantly. I found Caleb in the living room, curled on the couch, watching a nature documentary. He looked small, smaller than I remembered. When he saw me, he didn't run up or smile. "Hey, buddy," I said softly. "Hi," I sat beside him. He didn't move away, but he didn't lean in either. Then I heard it, Judith on the phone just a few feet away. "Yes, well, I've spoken to the attorney. I'm drafting the paperwork. She's unstable, you know, always has been, and Caleb needs consistency. She can't give him that." Her voice was low, calculated, not panicked, not angry, just certain I didn't say anything that night. Not to her, not to Caleb. I drove home with my hands trembling on the wheel and my throat a wildfire of swallowed screams. That was the moment I knew she was planning to take him from me, and not by force, but by something far more brutal. The law. The next morning, I found a white envelope taped to my apartment door inside a petition to revise custody. Judith's name as the petitioner, not Elliot's. Judith. She had officially declared me unfit. I didn't cry. Not then. Not when I called the lawyer. Not even when I told my best friend and heard the horror in her voice. I waited until the lights were off that night, when Caleb was gone, when the room was dark. Then I crawled into his bed, pressed my face to his pillow, and I wept into the scent of his hair still clinging to the fabric, because the war had started, and I didn't even have my son to hold on to anymore. I opened the custody petition and saw words that didn't belong to me but were about me, and they hurt like hell. I had read the word unfit 100 times in my life, in textbooks, in court, transcripts, in whispered gossip about strangers in grocery store lines. But I had never read it next to my name. Not until that morning. Lena Brooks is emotionally unstable, prone to erratic behavior, and presently incapable of providing a safe, nurturing environment for her minor son. The words didn't sting at first. They stunned, the way ice stings only after it's melted into your skin. There were 8 pages in total, all typed, double-spaced, clean margins, neatly indexed. I wasn't just being accused, I was being documented. Page 2 listed my concerning behaviors, instances pulled from thin air or twisted into unrecognizable caricatures of the truth. That I had violent outbursts. I slammed a cabinet once when I found a dead mouse. That I self-medicated. I drank 2 glasses of wine on my birthday. That I was chronically unemployed. I left a toxic job after a year of emotional abuse. There was even a note from Caleb's pediatrician, a note Judith had coerced or misrepresented, I still don't know which, stating that Caleb seemed withdrawn and anxious in the presence of his mother, and then the closing statement. A single sentence that unraveled me. For the safety and well-being of the child, we request temporary custody be granted to Judith Hale with supervised visitation for the biological mother. Lena Brooks, biological mother. Like I was a surrogate, a placeholder, a threat. I called Elliot. His voice was cool, unmoved. She's just trying to help Lena. Help. I choked. She wants to erase me. He sighed long and exasperated, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. She's worried, okay. And honestly, so am I. You've been really overwhelmed lately. Maybe this isn't the worst idea that broke something in me, not because I didn't expect it, but because I'd hoped. Somehow, somewhere, I'd hoped the man who once kissed my pregnant belly and whispered, "We're going to be a family," would remember what love had looked like. Even if only for Caleb's sake. But love isn't what gets remembered in court. The first hearing was set for Monday morning. The courthouse sat like a sleeping beast in the heart of the city. Gray, looming quiet in the worst way. I sat outside with my lawyer, Ms. Rivera, clutching a folder I couldn't bring myself to open. Inside were affidavits, pay stubs, apartment leases, proof that I was a mother, but no document can compete with the power of whispered doubt. Judith arrived in a navy skirt suit, pearl earrings, hair in a tight bun. She looked like someone who hosted charity luncheons and chaired reading clubs, the kind of woman judges listen to. She brought Elliot with her, and Caleb. When my son stepped into the hallway, I stood. He glanced at me. His mouth twitched. He started to move just half a step, but Judith's hand landed gently on his shoulder and he froze. She bent down, whispered something into his ear. He didn't look at me again. In the courtroom, I sat across from them. The judge asked for opening statements. Judith's lawyer, a silver-haired man with a voice like polished granite, stood and spoke as if he were disappointed. Not angry. Ms. Hale is here today, not as a grandmother but as a protector. This is not a matter of vengeance or blame. It's about ensuring that a vulnerable child is not caught in the emotional instability of an environment that has proven harmful. Every word was rehearsed, measured, designed to sound like concern, not control. Then it was my turn. Ms. Rivera stood. She was calm, deliberate. This case is not about danger, it's about dominance, about a grandmother who has used proximity and persuasion to alienate a child from his mother. We will present evidence of manipulation, coercion, and a systematic attempt to rewrite the family dynamic. The judge nodded, non-committal. Proceed. What followed felt less like a hearing and more like a performance, one in which I had been cast as the villain in a story I didn't write. Judith testified first. She spoke softly, hands folded, voice trembling at all the right moments. I've tried to support Lena as best I can, but there are days she doesn't return calls, nights she forgets to check on Caleb. He cries in his sleep sometimes, says he misses stability. She looked at me, eyes watery. I love my grandson, I just want him to be safe. No one questioned her sincerity, why would they? She looked like every grandmother in every TV drama, noble, loving, heartbroken. I sat there, my pulse like thunder in my ears. I wanted to scream, to stand and shout, "That's not true, you're lying," but I knew how that would look. Hysterical, unstable, everything she claimed I was. So I stayed still, let the silence bruise me. Elliot testified next. He was colder. Clinical. Lena's a good person, he said, as if offering me charity. But she's reactive. She takes things personally, struggles with consistency. Caleb needs structure, and Judith provides that. He never once used the word mother. And then it was my turn. I stood. My hands didn't shake, not because I was calm, but because I had gone numb. I am not perfect, I began. But I am present, I am trying. And no one loves Caleb the way I do. I could feel the weight of every eye on me. The judge, the lawyers, the stenographer. Even Caleb, sitting silently beside his grandmother, I looked at him. My voice softened. Do you remember when you were 5 and had that nightmare about the wolves in the hallway, who sat with you for 2 hours and held your hand until you fell asleep again? He didn't answer, didn't even blink. Judith placed a hand on his arm, and I understood. He wasn't allowed to remember me. The judge called for a recess, said he'd need more time, more evidence, but I already knew. The story had been written and I was the footnote. Outside the courtroom, as Judith passed by, she leaned in just slightly. Don't take it personally, dear, she whispered. Some women just aren't built for motherhood. That sentence didn't feel like a slap, it felt like a scalpel. That night I didn't go home. I drove no destination, just asphalt and headlights and the sound of my own breath breaking. At one point I pulled over, stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked hollow, unfamiliar, and then a thought sharp and sudden like glass shattering in the mind. They think I'm beaten. But I am only becoming quiet, not weak. If they had declared war with words, I would answer with evidence. If they tried to steal my son with silence, I would teach him how to break it. I stopped trying to fight the lies and started gathering truths, silently, carefully, just like they taught me. The day after court, I did not scream, I did not call Judith. I did not beg Elliot to reconsider. I bought a notebook, a cheap spiral-bound notebook with a purple cover and a sticker of a rainbow on the front, one Caleb would have picked for school. I opened it to the first page and wrote in black ink, block letters, Day 1, I will not let them erase me. Then I started to document. Not the kind of documentation they expected. Not emails or resumes or apartment lease renewals. No, I documented silence, glances, gaps. The moments in between, the ones Judith and Elliot were so sure I would miss because they believed I was too emotional to pay attention. They mistook heartbreak for helplessness. But pain has a strange way of sharpening the mind. Ms. Rivera, my lawyer, was the one who gave me the idea. Judith's winning because she's using performance. Let's give the court proof, she said, her voice low, controlled. She's not careful. Women like her never are. They've spent too long being believed. So I began to record, not publicly, not yet, just small things. Caleb's backpack smelling like cigarette smoke when Judith didn't smoke, suggesting someone else was in the house regularly. A bruise on his shin that he said came from being locked in the office for time out. Grandma says quiet teaches control, he mumbled one night on a supervised visit, eyes down. My blood turned to ice. She was punishing him with silence. Just like she tried to punish me. I bought a second phone, left it running voice memos when I dropped Caleb off. Hid it under the back seat, under his winter coat. At first, nothing. Judith's voice calm and cutting. Remember, you don't have to talk to your mother about everything. She gets confused. Then a few days later, if you cry again, Caleb, I'll call the doctor and say something's wrong with you. Do you want to go somewhere where they put sad boys? I had to pull over on the side of the road to breathe. I held the phone so tightly my hand went numb. I wanted to drive straight to her house, rip the door off its hinges, scream in her face, until the sky shattered. But I didn't. I saved the recording, labeled it, transcribed it. This was not vengeance. This was strategy. The next breakthrough came from a neighbor. Ms. Jenner, an elderly woman who walked her dog every afternoon past Judith's porch. I've seen that boy sitting outside alone, she told me, quietly, glancing over her shoulder as if Judith could hear her from 2 blocks away. Even in the cold, she says it's to teach him independence. I call it cruelty. She signed a sworn affidavit the next day. One by one, the facade cracked. And then Caleb. The boy, they said, was too young to understand. Too scared to speak, he became my greatest compass. It started on a Saturday when he was allowed a 2-hour supervised visit with me at a center with glass walls and a social worker watching every move. He was quieter than usual. His eyes had that look like a glass that had been knocked over too many times but still stood upright out of habit. I brought him puzzles, his favorite snack. Sat on the colorful rug beside him. Do you like your new room at Grandma's? I asked gently. He nodded. It has a lock, I blinked. It's a lock. He nodded again, bit his lip. Sometimes when I make noise, she says I need to think about being good. Then she turns the lock and leaves. I couldn't speak. My tongue felt heavy pressed to the roof of my mouth like lead. Then he looked at me. Really looked. and whispered, "If I say something, will the judge listen?" That moment broke me, not because he finally opened up, but because I realized he had been protecting me. My 9-year-old had learned that telling the truth could cost him everything, and so he stayed silent to shield the one person still calling herself Mom. I cupped his face in my hands and whispered back, "I believe you, and I'll help them believe you too." He nodded. Didn't cry, just leaned his forehead against mine. For the first time in weeks, I felt my son return to me. The next phase came quietly. Ms. Rivera compiled everything: the recordings, the neighbor testimonies, the photos of Caleb's locked door, a school counselor's report that Caleb's participation dropped the moment he moved in with Judith. But the jewel of our case, our final weapon, was something else. A statement, handwritten by Caleb, 26, words printed in careful block letters. "I love my mom. She listens when I talk. Grandma says I shouldn't, but I want to live with my mom because I feel safe with her." I held that paper in my hands and cried, not from sadness, but from reverence. My child had found his voice, and soon the court would hear it too. The night before the next hearing, I didn't sleep. I stood at Caleb's empty bed, fingers tracing the curve of his stuffed tiger's tail. I whispered a promise, not that I would win, but that I would never again let anyone speak louder than the truth we both carried. Let them build their fortress of lies. I was coming with light. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Caleb, do you know why you're here today?" My son nodded and changed everything. It rained the morning of the hearing, a cold, unforgiving drizzle that felt more like judgment than weather, as if the skies themselves were watching, waiting to see if I would rise or be washed away. I stood outside the courthouse with Ms. Rivera, her briefcase clutched in one hand, her other resting lightly on my shoulder. "You've done everything right," she said. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because doing everything right doesn't always save you in a system that listens more to perception than truth. Inside the courtroom smelled like paper and polished wood, sterile, indifferent. The same judge presided, his expression unreadable, like stone carved to resemble humanity. Judith was already seated, pristine as ever. Today her armor was beige, soft, unassuming. Her pearl earrings caught the overhead lights with every small tilt of her head. She looked like any grandmother you'd trust at a PTA meeting. Elliot sat next to her, stiff-backed and silent, and Caleb, he sat between them, dressed in a little blazer and clip-on tie, legs swinging above the floor, not quite touching. My heart twisted at the sight. He looked so small, so out of place. "Court is now in session." The words rang out like a bell toll. Judith's lawyer stood first, presenting his argument like a sermon, warm, rehearsed, meticulous. He painted me as chaotic, desperate, unstable. "She has documented mood swings, a history of unreliable employment, a pattern of emotional volatility that has made the child fearful." I sat, frozen fingers digging into the edge of the table. I'd heard these lies before, but somehow hearing them here under oath felt like being burned slowly and told to smile. He closed with a final blow. "We are requesting permanent custodial rights be transferred to Ms. Hale with Lena Brooks, limited to supervised visitation pending psychiatric evaluation." Then came Ms. Rivera, but she didn't thunder into action. She moved like a scalpel, silent, clean, precise. She laid out each piece: the recordings where Judith threatened a 9-year-old with imaginary institutions, the affidavit from Ms. Jenner, photos of the locked office door, the report from the school counselor. The judge listened silent, but it wasn't enough. Because facts alone can't compete with family roles, and Judith had perfected the performance. That's when Ms. Rivera turned slightly. "Your Honor," she said, "we respectfully request to allow the minor child, Caleb Brooks, to speak privately or in court under supervised conditions." There was a pause, sharp. Pregnant with shock, Judith's lawyer sputtered. "That's highly irregular." The judge raised a hand, looked down at Caleb. "Mr. Brooks," he said gently, "do you feel comfortable answering a few questions?" Caleb looked at me, our eyes locked. He nodded. He was sworn in. His tiny right hand, raised voice trembling. "I swear," he said, "to tell the truth." He sat on the witness chair, feet not touching the ground, hands clenched in his lap. The judge leaned forward. "Caleb, can you tell me how you feel living with your grandmother?" There was a long pause. I stopped breathing. "Then she's nice when people are watching," he said softly. A murmur rippled across the courtroom, and when they're not, the judge prompted. Caleb's voice dropped lower, but not uncertain. She locks the door, says, I need to be quiet. That mom talks too much, that I'll be broken like her if I listen. Dead silence. Even the court stenographer froze. Does your mom ever hurt you? The judge asked gently. Caleb shook his head so fast it was almost a blur. No, she hugs me. Makes pancakes on Sundays. She sings with me even when I sound bad. Laughter, soft but real. Tears blurred my vision. Do you feel safe with her? He nodded fiercely this time. The judge looked down, took a slow breath. And if it were up to you, Caleb, where would you want to live? That was it. The moment Caleb leaned forward, his voice was still quiet, but every syllable rang louder than Judith's entire case. With my mom, always with my mom, Judith shot up, voice cracking. He's been coached. This is manipulation. But no one looked at her. Even Elliot dropped his head as if ashamed. Miss Rivera stood slowly. No further questions, Your Honor. The judge cleared his throat. In light of the child's testimony and the evidence provided, this court sees no sufficient grounds to remove primary custody from the biological mother. All rights are hereby restored to Ms. Lena Brooks. Supervised visits for the petitioner, Miss Judith Hale, are to be determined at a later date. Bang, gavel hit wood. I didn't hear it. All I could hear was Caleb's voice, echoing like a prayer or a rescue. Always with my mom. Caleb ran to me, right there in front of everyone. He launched into my arms like he was remembering who I was, who he always knew I'd been. I held him tighter than I ever had before, not out of fear this time, but out of knowing. We were finally safe after the ruling. I didn't cry in the courtroom. Not because I wasn't overwhelmed, but because I had cried every tear I had. There was no sobbing, no victory dance, no dramatic stares exchanged. Just me standing in that cold, wood-paneled space, holding the warm body of my son against my chest, listening to the last echo of the judge's gavel disappear like thunder in the distance. People say justice is blind. I say it's quiet. And when it finally arrives, it doesn't roar, it exhales. Caleb's arms wrapped around my neck like a lifeline. He smelled of starch and something faintly artificial. Judith's house had that sterile museum scent. But under it all, beneath the fabric softener and control, I could still find him. Still find my boy. I missed you every night, he whispered. I know, I said, me too. We walked out of that courthouse together. Two survivors. Judith didn't look at me on her way out. She swept past like she was late for a meeting that didn't matter. The woman who once smiled like porcelain now moved like glass, brittle, cracked from within. And as she passed by, I felt nothing. Not hate, not pity, just absence. The power she once held over me had evaporated the moment Caleb said my name. Mom in front of a judge. No lie could compete with that truth. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. No headlines, no family apologies. Elliot sent a short message via email. Glad Caleb's okay, I'll check in sometime. He never did. I didn't chase him. Some absences are blessings in disguise. The first night back home, Caleb stood in the doorway of his old room, half-filled boxes, a dusty bookshelf, the same tiger plush on his pillow. Can we paint the walls? He asked. I smiled. Any color you want. He picked sky blue. We spent the weekend transforming it together. Me in overalls, him in an old shirt that hung like a robe. He got more paint on the floor than on the wall, but I didn't care. We were rebuilding something sacred, not a room, a sense of home. He asked me once, a few weeks later, while we sat on the floor playing cards. Were you scared, Mom? I didn't lie. Yes, I said. Every single day. He nodded, thoughtful. But you didn't give up. I looked at him, 9 years old and already carrying the kind of wisdom most people never earn. Neither did you, I said. He smiled. That kind of smile, the kind that says we made it through, is rarer than gold. I still have the purple notebook, page after page of dates, words, observations, proof. But I never reopened it after the verdict. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I didn't need to fight anymore. Instead, I started writing something else. A letter to Caleb. For when he's older, for when questions rise that I can't yet answer, I write. You once saved me without knowing. They tried to erase me from your life. But you held on to me in your silence, in your eyes, in the way you still called me Mom when no one else was listening. One day when you feel unsure of who you are, I hope you'll remember this. You are the boy who stood up, who spoke, who changed everything. I wasn't just fighting to keep custody. I was fighting to protect a story, the story of who I was, who we were, because sometimes the world tries to rename you unfit, unstable, unworthy. But a child's love is immune to slander, and when he spoke my name in court, he didn't just call me Mom. He reminded me I always had been, I didn't win, truth did, and in the end, that was more than enough.